Welcome back to episode 4 of everyone's favorite new series, Bridges, where we are bridging the gap between finance and marketing, and we are empowering marketing leaders to get more authority at the finance table. And today, this episode is titled The World's Most Beautiful P&L. And it's beautiful for two reasons. One, because of the numbers that it contains. Boy, are we going to look into what it looks like when an e-commerce business is crushing. But it's not just beautiful because of that. It's also beautiful because it comes out of Final Loop. Final Loop is an accounting software built exclusively for e-commerce. And when I met Leo, the founder and CEO of Final Loop, we traded some DMs because I knew that somebody was eventually going to go after this problem. Providing brands with the most real-time, fastest reconciliation of their accounting with an understanding point of view of the unique problems that e-commerce faces. And I can tell you, and you're going to see it today as we go through the P&L, I'm going to call out some of the unique things that they do in their exports. But Leo's a man after my own heart. We're kindred spirits. And this group of people is committed to making the lives of e-commerce operators so freaking much better. And that's why I'm proud to have them as the first sponsor of Bridges. These are people I believe in. They understand the unique problems that operators are facing, and they're building software to solve them. Check them out. Final Loop. Let's dive in. The world's most beautiful P&L. Here we go. Okay, last week we dove into a problem, right? We started with a practical example of how four-quarter accounting could help us to solve problems in a P&L to go from an extremely unprofitable business to profitability in 90 days, red to black in 90 days. If you haven't seen that episode, go back and watch it. Sorry. But today what I want to do is I want to help expand our minds, okay? One of the massive benefits that I have in the position that I'm in and why sometimes I feel like uniquely equipped to provide a voice to all of you as operators is that we get to see so many different brands. Over the last decade, thousands of brands, and I mean at the P&L level, the intimate understanding of what makes them work. And what this does is it helps me understand something really, really important that I want to invite you into, which is the breadth of possibility inside of an e-commerce business. A lot of times, individual brand operators suffer from what I call the local Maxima problem. It's not what I call it. It's an actual mathematical theory, which is to say that if you only have a small cluster of data samples, you believe that the bounds of possibility are represented in that tiny sample. So in other words, if you're only looking at your e-commerce P&L or you and a couple of friends or a few other operators, your sense of what is possible or what a metric should be are sometimes contained by that local set of samples. Today, I want to open the upper bound. I want you to understand what is truly possible in e-commerce. There's a lot of conversation about how our industry may not be viable, how D2C may not work. And this is just utter and complete nonsense. And every time I read it, I can just reference back to the factual examples I have of things where people are making massive amounts of money and driving incredible success. And today we're going to look at one of those examples. We're going to look at a business that is producing an immense amount of not only just operating income, but free cash flow. And we're going to analyze it through the lens of four-quarter accounting. And hopefully this is going to give you a sense of what is possible and to challenge your perceptions of how your business might have to exist. Oftentimes when I get into conversations with entrepreneurs about, in particular, the cost side of their business, they have these mental hurdles that they cannot get past about what must be true, what costs must exist, and what advertising expenses have to be set at or margins must exist at. But today we're going to get a chance to look deeply at something that is truly amazing. And along the way, I'm going to highlight some of the ways that Final Loop really builds an incredibly beautiful P&L. One, there's just the layout structure that is just a thing of beauty. I've gone through and hacked it up a bunch because I want to do two things. I want to protect the incredible operators whose business this is. So every single number has been changed. It's been multiplied up, down, moved, left, right. So this is not actually representative of anyone's individual data. It is a sort of directional representation of what a business exists as. Then I went out and just sort of hid the line items. But what I want to show you real quick about the structure of the P&L and why it indicates what Final Loop understands and what we talked about in the very first episode when we were talking about designing a P&L, really almost from a marketer standpoint. We're almost in total alignment in terms of how they do this. You'll see going from top to bottom, you have sales broken out at the top. You have sales by channel. Then you see discounts and promotions, returns and refunds. So this is another really important thing where you're seeing the actual, what we would call order revenue. They don't do gross sales, but they have order revenue, right? Or Corey, you're going to have to edit back to just before where I'm starting about this because I'm going to say something different. So what I love about the way that they structure the revenue, we go from gross sales minus discounts minus returns equals net sales. We can track those rates over time. Then another beautiful thing is we've got cost of goods sold, we've got our product costs, we've got our shipping and fulfillment, and we've got our merchant fees above the line. Okay. So this is something that, again, they understand that from a cost of goods sold standpoint in e-commerce, this is an above the line metric that should be part of your gross margin. So that's beautiful. And so they get to what they call total cost of goods sold. We might call it total cost of delivery, but they mean the same thing. And then another beautiful thing that happens here is that we see the percentages by default. So like they build percentage tracking into a lot of the P&L exports in a way that allows you to see that. I think that indication is so much easier to understand when looking at a P&L than the raw numbers. The raw numbers are often hard to sort through visually, but they do this automatically. Then as you move below the line into the operating expenses, you'll see G&A called out. You'll see payroll called out. You'll see advertising called out. And you'll see marketing called out in these really clear sections. Their chart of accounts is amazing. It's one of the best ways they make the P&L really simple. The only thing I don't like, and this is something Leo and I would talk about, is that I don't like that advertising and marketing expenses are grouped in their own category and that we don't have a line item for contribution margin. I would love to see advertising actually separated out here, just above the G&A into its own category. This is an appeal to the GAAP standards that they're compliant with. But regardless, it's just a beautifully designed P&L with a beautiful chart of accounts and the amount of resources beyond that is tons. Okay, so there we go. That's why I'm Team Final Loop. That's why they're sponsoring this podcast. I reach out to Leo directly. It was at my request that they come in because they are helping to equip people in the same way I am. They are interested in improving the education and financial understanding and financial wherewithal in our industry. So if we get back into what makes this so beautiful, I built our fancy 4-quarter accounting table right over here that we can reference and talk through. Another thing, Leo, throw 4-quarter accounting default in there. That'd be sick. But let's look at this. Let's understand. The first thing I want to work backwards from, and this is really, I think, the part that where our minds begin to expand around the sense of possibility, is that this business at almost $40 million in revenue from one channel, D2C only, not omni-channel, not distributed all over the place, not all these different things, one channel producing 43%, 45% in total for the period I'm looking at, January through October, 45% operating income, 45% profit on $40 million in revenue. That happens. It exists. I've seen multiple brands in this range of operating income, just cash producing monsters, selling stuff on the internet. It's absolutely possible and doable, but it requires unique sets of underlying attributes that is important. So let's talk about what those are. You can see the cost of goods sold actually sits above the 4-quarter accounting boundary. Again, 25% is really aggressive on total cost of delivery. This brand sits about 33%. Part of the way that you get there, and one of the benefits, is that there's a very low return volume, okay, relative to the revenue. This is like less than 0.5%. Now, this is where, again, if we think about which product categories have the genetic attributes to produce really awesome margin, fantastic cost of delivery. Last week, we talked about apparel, which suffers from the reality of returns as a high component of that. This category, which we're looking at a supplement business here, has none of those issues. The product doesn't get returned. And so you get maximum margin on every sale. Also, almost no discounts. Selling product at full price that never gets returned is a massive recipe for margin. So despite what is actually a fairly complex supply chain in this case, and not a commodity really much at all, they are able to produce fantastic margin. So products priced well. This was a thing that got called out in some questions in my last video talking about the apparel side of things. Couldn't they have done price testing? Yes, but price testing when you are discounting a bunch is sort of counterintuitive. It's sort of the same thing, right? You're trying to think about how that margin gets maximized. But in this case, they're probably actually representing that at this low of discount rate, there might actually be pricing leverage to the upside. And so there's actually probably expansion here, even in that category. But this combination of things, right? Low return rate, very little discounting, often is going to produce great margin. And then you just have product costs that, again, product costs often do come in at sub 25%, but your shipping and fulfillment, which you can see listed out here, right around that 10 or 11%. I referenced in the last episode, shipping and fulfillment should sit in this 10 to 12% range almost all the time. Again, big furniture sometimes goes up. There are categories where it becomes more complicated relative to fulfillment, but right in that sweet spot, 10 to 11%, about 20% on product costs, about 2% on your payment processor fees, 2.5%, and there you go. 20% product costs, 10% shipping, 2.5% on your payment processor fee, no returns, little discounts. There you go. Cost of delivery right in a beautiful range at 33%. Now, before we get to the advertising, because I know that's the one that's obviously standing out the most, I want to go to OpEx, because this is a brand where it would be so easy and so tempting to allow for OpEx inflation and lifestyle inflation. But that's not what this business exists to do. This business exists to produce cash for the shareholders, right? And so the inflation of the business doesn't happen in the OpEx. Now, what I can tell you is this is a company that cares for its employees, that it has an awesome culture, that it has an office, it has resources at that office for the employees that are cared for. They don't exploit people. They have a real investment in who they are. And you can see the payroll sits at sub 10%. Now, when I talked on Twitter this week, I was talking about how e-commerce is not really an FTE business. It's a seasonal business. Now, this is a business that's just sort of growing up into the right. It grows more like a software business because it's a lot subscription and the revenue is kind of stacking up into right over time. So there's not a lot of backwards movement in the revenue, which makes it easier to hire against. But it should be the case that you have revenue near to, or even in excess of $1 million per FTE. And when I look at payroll, again, we talked last week about the payroll of the brand almost at 16%, almost double this. So why is this group of people able to output more? It's not necessarily because they're smarter or more capable or any of those things. It's almost never the case. It's the amount of things that you're expected to do in the narrow focus. Oftentimes, these ancillary channels require bigger marketing investments. And so that wholesale business requires a bunch more staffing or sales, whatever it might be. It's not just wholesale, but I'm just saying this business is focused. They have a clear market. They have a single channel. They don't have a real breadth of media efforts. They know who they are, and they have the team that is focused on it. Most of the staffing is actually primarily focused in customer support, in being really aggressive about caring for their customers. So there you can see salaries and wages as part of the OpEx. Additionally, the rest of the marketing expenses, really low. Overall expenses, G&A, incredibly low. There's not a lot of software here. There's no attribution platforms. There's no ERP systems. Now, those are all things that I get it. At some stage, they exist, but they keep this lean. Not a lot of outside vendors and things contributing to the work. They're focused on the effort and they don't bloat and unnecessarily spend. And you have an OpEx for the entirety of business that's sub 15% of revenue. Total for the year to date is 14.6. The amount of leverage that you get out of producing profit when you run your OpEx at 15% will be transformative to you. And that is an area where the constraint breeds creativity, it breeds innovation, and it solves problems. Because if we get to this, we're going to talk about, obviously, the fact that the last thing here is that their CAC, their ad spend, is about 6% of total revenue. Okay, so at a 5%, that's a 20 to 1 MER. So we're talking about almost like an 18 to 1 MER on a growing business. Okay, that's producing mid 8 figures in revenue. Now, how does that happen? Okay, this doesn't happen from wildly efficient meta acquisition. It comes from generating organic demand from audience. Okay, it comes from tapping into the cultural zeitgeist in a way that you are riding a wave, not manufacturing demand. Manufacturing demand is expensive. Capturing a wave that is growing is hyper efficient. So this business combines so many of the things that when I see this work really well, this is what's present. You're riding a wave where the Google trend volume is going like this. The marketing is happening in a surrounding cultural fashion for you. You have some organic audience that you're developing and siphoning in to sell product. There's recurring revenue off the existing customer base that compounds over time. You're keeping the OpEx lean, you're avoiding the temptation, and you're keeping your cost of delivery in a perfect place and always trying to do that to constantly improve against it. And their team is ruthlessly committed to it. This is what you get This is real. This is there. And this, I know other things that I think are probably going through people's heads. Oh, supplements. That's the category this happens. I have seen this happen in accessories. I have seen this happen in multiple business categories where the composition changes all the time. I've seen businesses run their entire OpEx at sub 10%. They're fully remote, very low staffing, a lot of outsourcing, incredible production. I've seen margin as low as 18%. I've seen businesses that produce this kind of profit with CAC in the 35% range. There's no one way to do it. But it is critical to understand that you have to figure out what your leverage is and where your boundary creation happens so that you can produce this kind of beautiful outcome. So this is the challenge to you. Build the beautiful P&L. Build the beautiful business. And it starts by the discipline of the organization of this information. I would challenge you, if you don't have an output yet, it looks like this, go get into Final. Go check them out. Tell them I sent you. Say, I want a P&L like the beautiful one that Taylor's sharing. And I want my chart of accounts to be this clear. I want to understand my contribution margin. I want to understand my 4-quarter accounting. I want to know where my percentages are too high and I want to freaking solve it because I want to be the kind of person that produces a business at this profit. So there you have it. That's it. That's the beautiful P&L that gives you a boundary between what I'm seeing, where there are brands, where it is a dumpster fire, where the operating income is at a loss and we have to go in and fix it and it's solvable and you can do it. And it doesn't have to be this efficient on CAC basis all the time. And then here's the upper bound. Here's what it looks like when it's almost 50% operating income on mid 8 figures in revenue, making lots of shareholders, lots of money in e-commerce single channel, not even Amazon, none of that, just D2C. It's a viable business model. In addition to that, next week, we're going to start to dance. We're going to move beyond the P&L. We've spent a lot of time together inside of the profit and loss statement, which is one of the core financial documents, but there's 2 others, the cash flow statement and the balance sheet. And we're going to talk about how the P&L can lie to you. If the goal is to be able to actually create liquidity, to put money in your pocket, to make a business that is valuable, the P&L is insufficient in our ability to understand what's occurring. And we're actually going to go below the line. We're going to get into net income. We're going to talk about lending. We're going to talk about interest rates. We're going to talk about how inventory destroys capital and how the balance sheet is an indication of where the money might exist that is hidden from sight on the P&L. Come back next week. So marketers, as I leave you with it today, again, challenging the boundaries of possibility. One of the areas where we get stuck in this is we just go like, well, CAC has to be 25% of revenue, 30% or 40%. Here's what I would leave you with. I am a big believer that constrained thought exercises are really useful. I have this tweet that says, how would you grow your business if the only thing you could change was your unboxing experience, right? And it forces, that kind of thinking forces you to go, well, what would I do? What would need to be true to cut your CAC in half and maintain growth? What would need to be true? Just spend an hour on it. And it's probably not possible. It's probably not, but maybe it is. And I know that it is because I see people do it all the time. So I appreciate you all tuning into Bridges. Share this with somebody you know. I'm getting amazing feedback from so many of you that you're using this. I've gotten to talk with financial experts. I'm getting to talk to PE firms. I'm getting to talk to brands that are doing this. We've got so much exciting stuff coming. We have interviews with some CFOs set up. We've got lots of cool things coming. Share this with operators. Share this with your finance team. Watch it with your entire marketing org. Give me feedback. What else do you want to see and where else can we go? Local Maxima expanded. This is what's possible in our industry. Y'all are killing it. Keep diving in. Make this your second home right here inside of a P&L. Appreciate all of it.